Hey, gang. As mentioned in my most recent email, I want to just put together another quickie, maybe like 10-minute, hopefully not too much more than 10-minute video talking about the second paper that we're working on right now. The prompt having to do with defending a proposition. And it's trying to cut to the heart of some of the major issues that have been shaping rhetoric for the last, let's say, 400 years or so. And we've seen some of the twists and turns. Hopefully you understand what I'm pointing to here in terms of beliefs about where truth and reliable knowledge can be found. And it really does have to do with kind of our basic understandings of, who we are in relation to the world, the universe, one another, relation to language. So here's the way you could probably think about this in quicker terms. By the way, the Perelman video that you're going to be watching this week, the opening stuff on context and history, because we're transitioning from, the modern period, skipping over the 19th century and moving into the 20th century. So the beginning of that video tries to talk about that sort of contextual shift, right? You're going to get some information there too on what I'm talking about right now. So try to think of two worldviews, right? So we had the worldview of Descartes, which is also Ramus's worldview, and it's Plato's worldview, right? And so hopefully thinking about the models, you sort of see how Plato, Ramus, Descartes, these thinkers go together. And then you can group sort of the other three models together as like the rhetoric models. They have their differences. The Gorgianic one would be the kind of furthest away from the Platonic one in terms of like their views of knowledge and truth and, where we can kind of reliably appeal to one another, okay? But for our purposes, coming out of that modern period, you've got Descartes and you've got Vico, right? And they kind of represent these different worldviews. So we can talk about worldview one as the kind of Cartesian, Platonic, Ramus worldview, and we can talk about worldview two as the more poetic, sophistic kind of worldview, right? And so we've got Descartes and we've got Vico. They're representing these different kinds of basic conceptions of thought, language, communication, and knowledge itself and reality itself, right? All right, so the worldview one, the Cartesian worldview, this is coming from another reading that I sometimes teach, but you can think of this as the serious man worldview. This is coming from a Stanley Fish essay that I really like. And he talks about kind of two basic worldviews. There's serious man and there's rhetoric man. Serious man is that first worldview of Plato, Descartes, and so on, that sees a world, a universe of order, consistency, coherence, reliability, objectively knowable, like through proper analysis, empirical scientific analysis, we can know the world, we can understand the world, whether we're looking at rocks, whether we're looking at waves, or looking at elections, or parenting, or it doesn't matter what we're looking at, there is an order to it, and we can rely on that order, and we believe in that order. And so the function of language in that worldview is to mediate established ideas, reliably agreed upon premises, and to do so in as clear and well-ordered and as true and proper a way as possible, right? That conception of language and communication I often refer to as the correspondence theory of communication, meaning that we have an objective world out there. Let's say we're talking about a tree, classic example. All right, so out in the world there's a tree. That thing ought to correspond with, in my mind, an image, a mental image of a tree, right? So there's a kind of one-to-one correspondence, right? So I have a picture, an image of that tree that basically perfectly represents it. And then I'm able to turn that mental image into a sound or a marking Now we're getting into the language part. That again corresponds to my mental image, which corresponds to the outward reality of the tree. Then the next assumption is that in expressing those words, that you, as the receiver or listener, are also able to hear it or see it, read it, and internalize that same image, that same concept, right? So corresponding, there's a chain of correspondence going from the world to my mind, to my expressions, written or oral, through whatever mediums we're talking about, through the medium of air if we're talking, through the medium of email if we're writing an email, through the medium of, whatever, through writing books, then we can read books, right? So the correspondence theory is tree, 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 your brain tree, and then when you speak of tree, like there's this one-to-one correspondence. You guys ever played the telephone game in class? I've actually done this in class where you get everyone in the class to pass along just a innocuous little assertion, statement. Doesn't matter what it is really, but it should be kind of complicated enough where there's like 3 or 4 different maybe little ideas or terms in there. And then just like whisper it in the ear of the first student and let them all whisper it to each other and then see what it becomes at the very end, right? 20 or so iterations later. And sure enough, you all crack up because it failed to correspond, right? And what that illustrates is the cracks in communication. Nevertheless, there is a belief by some, and we've seen them, we've read them, we've encountered them, that language's job, this is the view of Serious Man, that language's job is to mediate like objective images of real things, right? And we do this back and forth. And if we do it well enough, and if we're disciplined enough, and we focus enough on clarity and like getting our terms right, then we can communicate effectively, and all is well, right? And so this is backed up by a kind of a theory of the universe as more or less reliable and predictable and sort of static and ordered and contained, right? That's worldview 1. Worldview 2 is the more kind of poetic and Rhetoric Man worldview, right? So this worldview recognizes or accepts or embraces this notion that there is no real theory of correspondence, that every time we go from reality to mind, there's static. When we go from mind to composition or expression, there's static. Things kind of get lost, changed, distorted, whatever, right? And then when I speak or when you hear or when you read, there's more static. Things get in the way. They complicate the message. They complicate our understanding of what we're trying to communicate about. And the Rhetoric Man view sees static and sees kind of cracks and errors kind of getting in the way all over the place, right? But nevertheless, this is how language works. This is how our minds work. This is how our attempts to communicate work. And they reflect a universe that is not perfect and tidy and ordered, but is kind of indeterminate and unpredictable and uncertain and maybe even chaotic, right? And so there's a lot of dynamism and complication and complexity. And communication is never as simple as this correspondence theory of like mimetic one-to-one kind of this matches that, matches that, matches that, and aren't we all nice and, in agreement here? Even as I'm describing, I'm kind of tipping the scales a little bit. This is a class in rhetoric. One of these worldviews is called Rhetoric Man. One of them is called Serious Man. Nevertheless, we still have serious men, operating all around us. I think that the assumptions and beliefs of many of the Silicon Valley tech companies are very much in line of like, this device will produce the exact outcomes that we want, and all you got to do is inputs, and then the outputs are perfect, and there's no loss of anything. And so there's a lot of those assumptions that play into that. So maybe what you can think about doing is putting on a sheet of paper is like a line, and you got 2 columns, and some of the terms that you can throw in each of these columns in terms of the different propositions, right? So the Serious Man column, terms like correspondence, order, coherence, reliability, consistency, clarity, sort of a uniform understanding, the idea that we can come up to sort of perfect cooperation if we get our terms correct and we use language correctly and we don't kind of allow our prejudices and biases to crowd in. The other one, terms like, the subjective, the poetic, the irrational, the unexpected, the uncertain, the contingent, the the unreliable, the unexpected, and so on, right? So these are sort of two different ways of thinking about how things are, how they work, how we think about them, and how we're able to communicate about them, and therefore influence and potentially change or persuade in whatever direction, right? So these assumptions are deep down below most any theory of communication or rhetoric, or more, and even most practices of communication and rhetoric are implicitly sort of operating through these different worldviews and assumptions, right? So what this paper is asking you to do is meditate on what you think is the right one, what you think is the right one, what you think is the best kind of characterization of who we are, how we live, and how we kind of get along with one another. It could very well be that we don't know as much as we think we know, and that in fact the universe and the world and society are all well ordered and complex in ways that we just don't understand. But sure enough, there is that kind of serious man, objective, reliable kind of world happening. Or it could be that sure enough, the world is kind of built out of chance and indeterminacy and randomness and so on. And so, communication and our attempts to kind of interact with one another are always complicated by external and even internal kind of, I use the word noise. It's just kind of a catch-all for anything that gets in the way and makes things hard to transmit, right? I have my own perspective on this, but it's not just so cleanly one or the other. I actually think that both of these worldviews are pretty important, right? But I guess the question is what do you think is most fundamental? Which one do you think is the one that better captures sort of the world as we find it and as we live in it? And to come up with two really strong, or the strongest kind of examples or illustrations that you can come up with. So I've been fielding some emails from folks about what about this or this or this? Kenneth Burke has a concept of the representative anecdote. He wrote about this in one of his motive books. The idea is to choose an example that best represents all the other examples. That it's like the uber representative example, right? So a representative example is something that is the kind of the best and most iconic example that you can think of to kind of cover as much other human activity as possible, right? So films are not a terrible idea. Some of you know that I like to work with films. They're handy, they're bounded. A lot of ideas packed in there. And one film that I often think about when I think about Serious Man, or at least the tensions between Serious Man and Rhetoric Man. This is an older film at this point, but it was really popular a number of years ago, called A Few Good Men. It's about, it's really about the kind of the logic of the military, the command logic, right? And the whole idea is that Jack Nicholson plays this super high up general, and he's very scary and intimidating. And there was a death by accident amongst a couple of privates in this this basin down in Cuba, Guantanamo. And the whole point of the story was to try to figure out where the command came from, because it turns out that these young privates, these two guys, were told to go mess up and rough up one of their what do they call them? Colleagues, privates, fellow guys, right? Because he was falling behind in his training. So he was told to these two guys were told to scare him into shape, essentially, and they ended up killing him. So Tom Cruise is the plucky lawyer who's trying to figure out what went wrong, and the whole thing is where did the command come from? And what you learn at the sort of big climactic scene, it's been 20 years, so no spoiler alerts needed here, I assume, right? But ultimately, this whole thing of your GD right, I ordered the code red. This is Jack Nicholson's big speech. He's it was me. I'm the one who gave the order. The point of the kind of the analysis is there is no room for interpretation or error. If the general gives an order, it must go through each of the 5 lower chains exactly as ordered, and so it ends up in that final destination, the minds of these two young privates, that they needed to go give a code red to their friend, to their trading buddy. So I often think of this as the kind of a digital logic, right? Which is like a digital logic is a perfect copy, 1-to-1, right? And so you get the command from the general, and there's a perfect copy that moves through that guy, that guy, that guy, and now down to the privates, and it's perfect. And that's what's established in the film, is like the military operates on this kind of perfect serious man logic of correspondence. What is said from this place must move directly through to the end channel exactly as spoken, right? And the whole point of the movie is actually, this is terrible, right? Like, even soldiers, even privates, ought to have the ability to interpret things when they're really, really bad, and to kind of stand up for the wrongness of the command, which is really contrary to the spirit of the whole logic of the military, which is like correspondence. If it is dictated, if it is commanded, it must be so. There's no room for interpretation or loss of that message. So that would be an example. You could draw on, I'm not asking anyone to do that analysis because I've essentially handed it to you, but you can think of movies that kind of get at these things. You can think of maybe commercials or advertisements that express a serious man worldview versus a rhetoric man worldview. You can talk about some industry or some pursuit, maybe the attempt to go to the moon or Mars or whatever. I don't want to tell you too much. I'm just trying to give you a little bit more about the thought behind this assignment. And it really is about these kind of two basic sort of assumptions, operating assumptions about how things are, and therefore how language fits into sort of our understandings of our relations to the wider world and to each other, right? I thought that everyone did in both classes. I'm teaching 2 sections, and I thought pretty much everyone did a really, really nice job in that first paper with that movie and with Plato. And to be honest, it's been a long time since I've assigned a paper on Plato, but matching it up with that movie and seeing the rich kind of correspondences and resonances between them was really cool. But it seems like many of you got sort of excited about that project and really dove in. So that was awesome. And I have a lot of faith in y'all's ability to do this one more time. Please don't kill yourselves here. I'm looking for imagination. I'm looking for good examples, good punchy, representative anecdote kind of examples, and your ability to explain them, drawing on the texts, Descartes, Vico, and whoever else you think is most relevant. So hopefully that is helpful. I'm still talking with folks. I pushed the deadline half a week to give you a little more time to think about this. I think I don't want to push it too much beyond that because we got more work to do beyond that. So I hope you have a little bit of fun thinking of examples and kind of thinking about these different ways of approaching communication and reality. And in the meantime, shoot me emails or reach out if you're still having problems. I don't want you to feel like you're twisting in the wind. So there you go, gang. Good luck. Catch you.